you were telling me about the inspiration for your new work of fiction. I guess could you call it a thriller?
Yeah,
City
I
of
hope
Grudges.
so. Yes, it is.
And the idea, which I find both amusing and terrifying, that in a city like Pensacola, if there are two major politicians who are fighting and have a grudge with each other, it probably has something to do with what happened in high school. But tell us a little bit about Pensacola, because obviously Mike Papantonio is down there, and he's written 3 books that take place in Pensacola. And I talk to people in Pensacola quite a bit through our radio program. I've never been down there, but it seems to me like a place that is, I don't want to say schizophrenic, but has multiple personalities in some respect.
Well, it does. It's still part of the South. It's not like our neighbors in Miami and Orlando and Tampa. It's probably closer to akin to Alabama and Georgia than it is the rest of the state of Florida. As we're talking a little bit about the break, one of the other part of calling it City of Grudges is that this is where Andrew Jackson was the territorial governor here. Right outside of this studio, there's a square with a big bust of him. And in the book, I call Andrew Jackson the patron saint of grudges, because I don't think, other than this president now, I don't think we've had another president that had as many grudges and carried as many pieces of lead in his chest as Andrew Jackson did. So we play off of that. It's a beautiful town. Of course, we have Pensacola Beach, very historic. This town almost was the first settlement. They settled here about a year or two before, tried to settle here in Pensacola before St. Augustine. Hurricane came, destroyed the settlement. They left and abandoned it. And then St. Augustine came a couple of years later, and Pensacola's always tried to achieve that glory of that potential of that very first settlement. Has never quite made it for 450 years, and that's sort of part of the truth. Pensacola's always on the verge of greatness, or over the years as you look at it, and then there's a storm, there's a corruption, there's something that happens that pulls the city back.
How does that impact the people living there? That notion of it's always within arm's reach, but we can never quite get there.
Well, that's how you know someone's new to Pensacola. If when someone sits around a table and starts talking to you about the potential of the town, you realize that they've only been here about 3 or 4 years, and by the 5th year, this town's beat the heck out of them, and they've either become cynical or realized that it's not quite what they thought it was. There's a nature to Pensacola that there is a good old boy system. There is a system that likes everything the way it is. It's starting to change. I think we've had more. One of the positive twists coming out of the BP oil spill is that some of that money has helped us reconfigure how we act as a town, and it's starting to happen. I love the people here, and when you read City of Grudges, you get a hint of some of the everyday great people in a town like this. But there's always those that already have all the advantages that want to keep their advantages, and that's part of this book too.
How much does race play a part in this story? In Pensacola, I guess more broadly.
More broadly, it's still a factor here. It's a huge factor. It's a huge disparity with race. It's socioeconomic in that there are very few black-owned businesses here in Pensacola. So race is always a part of the story. Whenever you tell the story of the South, Sam, it's always going to be a part of the story. Not necessarily a bad part, but it's a part that needs to be talked about. In the book, it's somewhat of a part of it, not as much. The next book that I'm working on, it's going to be a much bigger part. But we sort of set the ground game for that in the first one.
And I mean, when you write and you express this in the context of your journalism, right? I mean,
right.
You're writing about your community. you're sending it off, or you're having it published. I don't know. We don't have we don't have a printing press anymore, but you're publishing it, you're distributing it, and then you go into the supermarket, and you're going to have to be held to account for what you write. I guess I got two questions about that. One is, the fact that you're being held to account, does that change the nature of the journalism versus, let's say, somebody reading a national paper?
I think it does. You have to figure out what we talk about in our staff meetings. Is this the hill to die on? Do we have all our pieces? There's almost a bigger responsibility to be sure that you've done all the research properly, that you're not jumping the gun too quickly, that you put the pieces together correctly. And so I think there's a little bit higher accountability that you're not going to rush to get to break news that's not as important in our kind of business as just trying to be sure that we got it right. And there are plenty of we've hit plenty of big time stories here. But we really pride ourselves on that we did spend that extra time to get it right.
Do you feel inhibited in any way by the fact that you're writing about your own town?
No, I kind of, that's one of the pieces that I enjoyed. I really wanted this book, and hopefully it will be, and that when people read it, you'll enjoy the story, but there'll be pieces of Pensacola you're going to want to see. You want some of the restaurants, some of the characters, some of the places, kind of like Midnight in the Garden, Good and Evil did for Savannah. That I wanted it to be something that would make people want to come to Pensacola.
Interesting, and I wonder if writing in fiction is it easier in some respects? Is it harder? But how is it different from straight journalism?
Well, the hardest thing for me to get used to is that as a journalist, I write in the present or the near present, or the near past. And in writing a novel, everything's in past tense. So getting used to writing in that context was probably one of the bigger challenges. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think one of the keys that seemed to work with my agent and the publisher was the conversation, because being a journalist, I listen to how people talk in the stories they tell, and I think that may be one of the biggest hooks of the book, is that when you read how these people talk to each other, you're going to say, that's a real conversation. That's how it happens.
Rick, the book is City of Grudges. It's available now. People can get it through their book buying outlets. Rick Outzen, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.